Good morning, class.
Good morning, ma'am.
Assalamu alaikum, ma'am.
Ramadan Mubarak to all of you. So the whole week we had three classes that we have missed. So today will be your one makeup class of 1.5 hour. I'll try to finish early so that the guys can go for the press, and then next week we have another makeup classes, so it should be good enough for you to cover all the topics. Okay, I've given some reading materials to all of you. Did you all have a chance to cover all the reading materials? Some of it? Okay. Good to know. Try to finish the reading materials before we start our class on the 28th. So 28th, you'll have your normal class with me. And then 26th, so it's a holiday. Anyway, so today also we're done with just a quick recap of what we have done. So we're done with contract law. Today we'll be doing the last part, which is termination of contracts. So far we've seen all the essential elements. Today we'll be seeing that how can we terminate a contract. So how do a contract come to an end? Remember the time when we did offer and acceptance? We've seen that offers can be terminated. Similarly, if a contract is formed between two parties or more than two parties, that contract will also come to an end. Normal general rule is the contract comes to end due to lapse of time. So there's a expiry time limit or an expiry date for it. So say for in Bangladesh, contracts usually expires after 6 years. So if you want to sue someone, the time period, the time limitation is 6 years. So normally the contract terminates after the time period lapses. I've seen that in case of offer as well, that the offer is open for a certain time period, and after that certain time period lapses, the offer terminates. However, there are other ways through which you can terminate a contract. Say, for example, two people have entered into an agreement, but they now mutually okay, they now mutually agree to terminate that contract. That will be termination as well. So today we will see all the different methods of terminations. So far we have seen the essential elements, offer, acceptance. The object of the contract should be lawful. What happens to a contract if it's unlawful? It can either be void, it can be voidable. Then we saw that the consent of the contract must be free. The parties must have the capacity to enter into a contract, and the consideration in the contract must be lawful. So we've seen all the essential elements of contract. Today we will see how can a contract be terminated. So there are 7 methods to terminate a contract. With that, one of the methods to terminate a contract is breach of contract. So when one of the parties breaches the terms and conditions, breaks the terms and conditions, what happens? The contract is breached. If the contract is breached, there are certain consequences. What are those consequences? So normally, if the contract has been breached, it can be either anticipatory or actual breach of contract. When a contract is breached, the aggrieved party, যে ক্ষতিগ্রস্ত party, the aggrieved party is usually entitled to receive remedies. And what are those remedies? That's all we will be seeing today as well. Okay, so is everyone clear so far? So we're done with all the essential elements. I've given some reading materials, some exercise questions for you to practice. I haven't given any other questions because I thought that it should be more than enough. And then on the 28th, the Tuesday's class we will have a revision and a sample question discussion. So how to answer a problem question for your midterm exams, and what are the types of questions and the suggestions that you need to study for your exams. We'll discuss all those on our Tuesdays, the coming Tuesdays class. So do not miss your Tuesdays class. It's very important.
Yes.
But yes,
Miss, are you going to provide the class recording?
So there's no recording options, but I'm recording anyways in my phone. So you will not get the video of what we're discussing, but the audio recording. Is
All
that
right,
good
Miss.
enough?
Miss, I do have a meet today, so can I take a leave from the class and oh, that
When
will be on campus?
okay, when do you have the meet?
Miss, I have my meet from 11:30.
Okay, fine. I'll give your attendance. Don't worry.
Okay, Miss. Thank you.
No problem. Tasin Rahman. Okay, so as I was saying, that in terms of the topics that we have covered so far, we have seen the all the elements of contract, and have given the reading materials as well for you to give an extra idea and clarification of what we have done so far. Today, we'll mainly focus on how a contract needs to be terminated, which is the last part of contract law. The next week, we will move on with agency law and indemnity and uh, guarantee contracts. So, those are called quasi contracts, which are different than normal bilateral and unilateral contracts. So, yes, agency and indemnity contract, once we're done with that, you'll have your midterm exams afterwards. So, today we'll mainly focus on termination and what are the different methods to terminate a contract. So let's see. Okay, can you all view my screen?
Yes, miss.
Yes, ma'am.
Okay, perfect. So, আমরা দেখেছি যে in the last class we finished free consent. So we saw that there are five ways in which the contract, if it is caused by any of the situation, the contract becomes either voidable or void. We now know the difference between void and voidable. I've also given you the chapter to study for your better clarification, that difference between a void and voidable contracts. And we've seen that in situations where the contract is caused by any physical force, say, for example, coercion, any mental pressure, say, for example, undue influence, any fraudulent activity, say, under Section 17 fraud, or any statement which is inaccurate, misleading, say, under Section 18 misrepresentation, the contract will be caused by any of the situation will become voidable. And then we also saw that if the contract is caused by any mistake of fact, where the main contract factual statement is mistakenly obtained and none of the parties were aware of that fact, in that case, that contract will be caused by mistake, and as a result, the contract becomes void. Other than that, we also saw that in terms of if a contract is if the parties do not have the capacity to enter into a contract, the contracts become void. So we are done with all the essential elements that needs to be present to bind a contract. Today we will see that what happens when the contract is terminated. How can you terminate a contract? So the first way you can terminate a contract is just by performing it, right? So at a contract, there are legal obligations being created, right? Say for example, me and Samiha enters into a contract, and I have offered her to sell my car, and she has accepted that offer to buy my car. Okay, so considering that all the other essential elements are present, we have binded each other, formed and created a contract. Now, the legal obligations that would arise normally as a seller, my legal obligation would be to deliver the car, with all the terms and conditions that we have agreed upon. On the other hand, Samia's legal obligations would be to pay the price for the car, for the legal object of the contract. So these are our legal obligations. Normally, if both the parties have performed their legal obligations, will the contract come to an end? Of course it will. So that is the first method of termination, that a contract comes to an end. The most normal, natural way for a contract to terminate is when the parties fulfill their legal obligations. So, termination can take place when the contract is being performed by the parties, which is the first method of termination. So, there are seven methods through which a contract comes to an end. That's what we called as that the contract is terminated or discharged. The first method of termination is termination by performance. That is the normal, natural mode of termination where the parties have certain obligations and they perform as per those terms and conditions and fulfill their obligation. As a result, naturally, the contract comes to an end after the parties have performed their legal obligation. Secondly, the contract can also come to an end if the contracting parties mutually agree to terminate the contract. That is what we call as termination by mutual agreement. Third, the contract can also come to an end if there is any subsequent impossibility of performance. So, due to a subsequent event, the contract becomes impossible to perform. Let's give an example. Say I have entered into an agreement with same example with Tamiya, and I have agreed to rent my music hall for her to perform. She's a singer, say, hypothetically speaking, that she's a singer, and she has hired the music hall to sing. However, before after the contract has been formed, before her performance, I get to know, and she gets to know as well, that the hall has been burned down due to any external factors, due to something has happened. As a result, it caught fire and the hall is destroyed now. Is it impossible for her to sing in that music hall? No. So, due to a subsequent event, the contract becomes impossible to perform. As a result, the contract can also be discharged or terminated. That's what we call as termination by subsequent impossibility of performance. যেখানে কন্ট্রাক্টটা যখন ফর্ম করা হয়, it is a fully valid contract. However, due to a subsequent event that arises after the contract is formed, it becomes impossible for the parties to perform. That is what we called as termination by subsequent impossibility of performance. Then comes number four is termination by operation of law. So if there's any changes in the laws, or if we have declared someone as you already know as an insolvent person, or the company has merged, in that case as well, due to the changes in the operation of law, the contract will be terminated as well. Fifth is termination by lapse of time. So we all know that a contract is being formed for a specific time period. After the specific time period expires or passes, the contract generally lapses. So that's what we call as termination of the contract has taken place by lapse of time. Sixth, by material alteration of the contract. So, if we change the terms and conditions of the contract without the consent of the other contracting parties, so say for example, there are two parties in a contract, one of the parties have changed the terms and conditions without taking the consent from the other parties. That would mean that the terms and conditions of the contract has been altered, changed. So the contract has been materially altered without the consent of the other parties. That would also terminate a contract. Lastly, if the contract is terminated due to breach. So if any of the either parties have breached the terms and condition, as a result, the contract can also be terminated. We call that termination as termination by breach of contract. So these are the seven methods of contract that we will be termination that we will be discussing today, one by one. The first one is termination by performance. As I said already, that in a contract, we create certain legal obligations. Normally, the contract comes to an end when the parties perform those obligations. So, performance by all the parties of the respective obligations will put the contract to an end completely. That is what we call as the most normal and natural mode of discharging or terminating a contract, which is termination by performance. Parties have legal obligations, they have performed their promises and the legal obligation. As a result, the contract has come to an end. So that's the first method of termination, termination by performance. Any questions, guys?
No, miss.
Yes, ma'am.
Miss, I had a question.
Yes.
Miss, can you please explain the operation of law, the way that
Oh,
contract
go
is
through
breached?
it. So we'll go through all of them in details now. So that was just a brief of the seven methods. এখন একটু পর আমি যখন প্রত্যেকটা method discuss করবো, so I'll discuss it again in details. Okay.
All right, Miss. Thank you.
Okay. Perfect. Yes, Osam. Okay. Okay, so that's all about termination by performance. That when a contract creates legal obligations, as soon as those legal obligations are being fulfilled, then normally the contract comes to an end. The second termination is when termination takes place by mutual agreements. So, by agreement of all of the contracting parties, a contract can be cancelled, or the terms of the contract can be altered, or a new agreement can be substituted for an old agreement. Whenever any of this happens, the old contract is terminated. So, let's see one by one. So termination by mutual agreement কখন হয়? Termination by mutual agreement হয় যখন পার্টিসরা mutually decide করে যে they want to cancel the entire contract or they want to alter the terms of the contract. Naturally, যদি আমি আমার কন্ট্রাক্টের টার্মস এন্ড কন্ডিশনস অল্টার করি, তাহলে কি হবে? একটা নতুন এগ্রিমেন্ট ফর্ম হবে। তাহলে নতুন এগ্রিমেন্ট যদি ফর্ম হয়, পুরানো এগ্রিমেন্ট বা ওল্ড এগ্রিমেন্টের কি হবে? সেটা টার্মিনেট হয়ে যাবে, right? So if either the parties entirely with consent of all the parties decide that they want to cancel the entire agreement or they want to alter the terms and conditions of the agreement and form a new agreement by substituting with an older agreement, the old contract is being terminated by mutual agreement. Under Section 62 of the Contract Act 1872, it is being stated that if the parties to a contract agree to substitute a new contract or they resign or alter the terms and conditions of the contract, the original contract need not be performed. As a result, the original old contract will be terminated. So there are different ways through which termination can take place by mutual agreements. So the parties normally, if they substitute a new contract with an old contract, the contract will be terminated by mutual agreement. However, there are different methods through which we discuss that how termination can take place by mutual agreement. So the first method through which termination can take place by mutual agreement is what we call as novation. So when a new contract is substituted for an existing contract, either between the same parties or between different parties, we call that as novation. Novation is also a method of termination by mutual agreement. That is the first situation that we will see today. So novation takes place when either the parties change the existing equation and the parties the change their change in the parties, or there's a substitution of a new contract in place of an old contract. So যে কোনো ক্ষেত্রে novation হতে পারে। if there's a change of parties in the contract, in the existing contract, or if there's a substitution of a new contract in place of an old contract. So let's give an example for both of the situations. Situation one is novation can take place when there is change of parties. So if the parties have changed in a contract, a new contract will be substituted for an old contract. As a result, the old contract will be terminated by novation. Say if there are two parties in a contract, there's a loan agreement. John has taken money from Jane. As a result, there has been a loan agreement created between John and Jane. Okay. So, similarly, Jane has also taken money from Claire. So, John is indebted to Jane. So, John needs to pay Jane. On the other hand, there's another agreement where Jane needs to pay Claire. So, there are two contracts. One contract, one loan contract is between John and Jane, where John owes money to Jane. Another contract is between Jane and Claire, where Jane owes money to Claire. Now, three of the contracting parties decide that let's mutually substitute these two agreements into one agreement. So by mutual agreement, John, Jane, and Claire decides that Jane's debt to Claire is cancelled and John's debts to Jane is cancelled. Now, John is directly indebted to pay Claire. In that case, this new contract between John and Claire has been substituted and has cancelled the existing contract between John and Jane and Claire. So let's repeat again because I feel like students usually struggle whenever I'm discussing novation. So let's repeat again. So there's a contract between John and Jane. যেখানে John needs to pay Jane. So John owes money to Jane. Okay? Is everyone clear to this part?
Yes, miss.
Yes, miss.
Ma'am,
Jane, আবার okay. So John has taken money from Jane. Okay? লোন নিয়েছে। John জেনের কাছ থেকে লোন নিয়েছে। As a result, তাদের মধ্যে একটা লোন এগ্রিমেন্ট হয়েছে। Okay? Let's say 100 টাকার লোন নিয়েছে। Okay? So John owes, so জনের এই টাকাটা রিটার্ন করতে হবে না, লোন নেওয়া মানে কি? It means that you're indebted to return that money to your creditor, right? So John is the debtor, Jane is the creditor. এখন John যে 100 টাকাটা লোন নিয়েছে তার এটা রিটার্ন করতে হবে। So John owes money to Jane. Okay? This is one loan agreement between John and Jane. যেখানে John owes money to Jane. Okay? Now, another agreement, Jane has taken money from Claire. So Jane owes money to Claire. Jane has taken 100 taka and Jane needs to pay that 100 taka to Claire. Okay? So দুইটা contract হয়েছে, একটা contract that John has taken money from Jane and Jane, to give that money to John, has taken money from Claire. So দুইটা individual loan agreement আছে এখানে. One is between John and Jane, where John is the debtor and Jane is the creditor. John owes money to Jane. In another loan agreement, Jane is the debtor and Claire is the creditor. Jane has taken money from Claire. So Jane owes money, owes 100 taka to Claire. Okay? Now, three of them decides that they want to mutually agree to terminate the contracts between them. So by mutual agreement, John and Jane's contract has been cancelled and Jane and Claire's contract has been cancelled. Now, the new agreement where John is the debtor and Claire is the creditor. So directly, John, Jane ke taka na diye, directly she Claire ke taka diche. Okay? So because the first agreement was between John and Jane where Jane had to be repaid by John. Similarly, in another agreement, Claire had to be repaid by Jane. Now, the parties decides by mutual agreement that Jane's debt to Claire is cancelled and John's debt to Jane is cancelled. Now, directly, Claire will accept the 100 taka from John. John is the new debtor, Claire is the new creditor. A new loan agreement has been formed between John and Jane, where John directly owes money to Claire. সো যে 100 টাকাটা সে জেনের কাছ থেকে নিয়েছিল, জেন সেই 100 টাকাটা ক্লেয়ারের কাছ থেকে নিয়েছিল। ওকে, সো জেন took the money from Claire to give the loan to John. Okay, now the parties decide that rather than Jane being a party to a contract, they can directly become contracting parties where John can return, repay the money that he has taken to Claire directly. So the new creditor is Claire and John is the new debtor, and a new loan agreement has been formed where there has been change of parties. Is Jane anymore the party to a contract? No. What has happened here? Novation has taken place. The parties, the chair has been changed of parties. As a result, a new contract has been substituted with an existing old contract. What happened to the old contracts? The contract between John and Jane. That is cancelled. It is being terminated. What happened to the contract between Jane and Claire? It is also cancelled. How is it cancelled? It is cancelled by novation. Due to change of parties, a new contract has substituted with an old contract. As a result, the old contract between John and Jane and Claire has been cancelled due to novation. So this is example one, that how novation can take place. Is everyone clear, or do I have to repeat again?
না ম্যাম, it's clear now.
বুঝতে পেরেছেন? সো ফার্স্টলি একটা কন্ট্রাক্ট ফর্ম হয়েছিল জন আর জেনের মধ্যে, যেখানে জন হ্যাজ টেকেন মানি ফ্রম জেন। ওকে, জেন টু গিভ দ্যাট মানি, she has also taken that money from someone else. Okay, so there are three parties. জন টাকা নিয়েছে জেনের কাছ থেকে, জেন তাকে টাকাটা দেওয়ার জন্য আরেকজনের কাছ থেকে টাকা নিয়েছে। ওকে, সো দুইটা এক্সিস্টিং কন্ট্রাক্ট, একটা লোন এগ্রিমেন্টে জন ইজ দ্য ডেটর, জেন ইজ দ্য ক্রেডিটর। আরেকটা লোন এগ্রিমেন্টে জেন ইজ দ্য ডেটর, ক্লেয়ার ইজ দ্য ক্রেডিটর। এখন পার্টিসরা বাই মিউচুয়াল এগ্রিমেন্ট মানে কি, সবাই কনসেন্ট করে দে ডিসাইড দ্যাট দে উইল ক্যান্সেল দেয়ার ওল্ড কন্ট্রাক্টস। কি ওল্ড কন্ট্রাক্টস ক্যান্সেল করবে? দ্য কন্ট্রাক্ট বিটুইন জন and Jane and Claire. By canceling them, they form a new contract. So a new contract has substituted for an existing contract. New contract অনুযায়ী John will not pay Jane. John will directly pay Claire. যে ইনিশিয়ালি জেনকে টাকাটা দিয়েছিল, জেন টাকাটা নিয়ে ক্লেয়ারের কাছ থেকে 100 টাকা নিয়ে তা জনকে লোন দিয়েছে, রাইট? এখন বাই মিউচুয়াল এগ্রিমেন্ট পার্টিসরা তাদের এক্সিস্টিং কন্ট্রাক্টস ক্যান্সেল করে নতুন কন্ট্রাক্ট ফর্ম করে জন বিকামস এ নিউ ডেটর, যে সে ডিরেক্টলি জেনকে টাকা দিচ্ছে না, সে ডিরেক্টলি ক্লেয়ারকে টাকা দিচ্ছে। সো দিস নিউ কন্ট্রাক্ট হ্যাজ বিন ক্যান্সেলড with an existing contract. So what has happened to those existing contracts? By change of parties, the contract is terminated by mutual agreement. When there is change of parties, we call that termination by mutual agreement as novation. So novation is a method to terminate a contract by mutual agreement. Is everyone clear?
Yes ma'am.
Yes, ma'am.
Okay, so now let's see situation two. Situation two is when, as we just discussed, when a contract is substituted with an old contract. So a new contract is in place of an old contract. We call that situation as also a method of termination by mutual agreement, and novation has taken place. So novation can take place either whenever there change of parties or a substitution of a new contract in place of an old existing contract. So situation two can be when you can substitute a new contract with an old contract. Would be, say one party has taken loan from the other party. So John has taken $1,000 loan from Patrick. Now John does not have $1,000 to return. Okay, তার কাছে যে টাকাটা সে লোন নিয়েছে এখন তার কাছে টাকা নেই, কিন্তু কন্ট্রাক্ট অনুযায়ী তার 31st জানুয়ারির মধ্যে তার টাকাটা রিপে করতে হবে। এখন সে প্যাট্রিককে যে বললো যে ওয়েল লেটস ফর্ম আ কন্ট্রাক্ট যেখানে I'll give you $500 in cash and বাকিটা আমি আপনাকে গোল্ডের মাধ্যমে দিব। So by certain amount of gold and $500 of cash, with total amounting to approximately $1,000, will be repaid within a month. Okay? So what has happened here? Onader existing contract অনুযায়ী, it was agreed that he will be giving $1,000 in cash to Patrick, right? He's the debtor, Patrick is the creditor. Now, both the parties have mutually agreed that he will be repaying the loan, however, to a different terms and condition. First term, he will be paying $500 in cash, and the second term is that a certain amount of gold, which approximately cost around $500, will be paid off. So what has happened here? The terms and conditions has been replaced by new terms and conditions. So a new contract has been substituted in place of an old contract. What has happened to the old contract? The old contract has been terminated due to novation. So in both situations, novation can occur whenever there change in parties of the contract or whenever a substitution of a new contract has taken place for an old contract. In both situations, we can say that a novation has taken place. So novation কখন হয়? যখন contract is being terminated, either where there is a change of parties or when a new contract is substituted for an existing contract. So that is the first method of termination by mutual agreement. The second method is alteration. So whenever we change the terms and conditions of a contract and the parties have consented to it, যেখানে টার্মস কন্ডিশনস কোন একটা টার্মস অল্টার করা হচ্ছে, এডিট করা হচ্ছে, চেঞ্জ করা হচ্ছে, and parties-রা mutually agree করছে to change those terms and conditions, we call that a new contract has been substituted due to alteration. So alteration, let's see the difference between novation and alteration since they're very similar. Alteration is whenever the terms and conditions of a contract has been changed by mutual agreement. However, novation ক্ষেত্রে, the terms and conditions are being substituted. Also, there are change of parties. In terms of alteration, there is no change of parties. The parties remains the same. There is no third party being involved. However, novation ক্ষেত্রে, the parties can be changed, a third party can be introduced, and novation can also occur whenever there is a substitution of an old contract with a new contract. In terms of novation, novation resigns the original contract. Recession মানে কি? Recession মানে হলো it terminates the original contract entirely. As a result, the original contract does not need to be performed. আমরা একটু আগেই দেখলাম যে দুইটার ক্ষেত্রে original contractটা কি ছিল? একটা original contract ছিল that John needs to pay $1,000 to Patrick. So that contract was not performed because it was cancelled. Similarly, the other contract say that John needs to pay $100 to Jane and Jane needed to pay $100 to Claire. However, both the contracts were resigned. So novation ক্ষেত্রে, due to novation has been occurred, the original contract does not need to be performed because it has been resigned. Resign মানে হলো terminate হওয়া বা cancel হওয়া. This is a fancy word for termination that we use in law. So rescission বলি আমরা। So novation resigns the original contract. However, for alteration, alteration does not resign the original contract. There is a same contract. However, that same contract has been modified in a manner where the modified version needs to be performed. Okay, so that's the two differences between alteration and novation. Alteration এর ক্ষেত্রে, terms of the existing contract has been changed and parties have mutually agreed to make those changes. As a result, those terms and conditions, since it has been changed, we say that those terms and conditions has been altered. As a result, alteration through the termination has taken place. For novation, novation happens when there is changed in the existing contracts due to change of parties or there's a substitution of an old contract. Substitution মানে কি? যে একটা কন্ট্রাক্টকে সাবস্টিটিউট করা হয়েছে বাই আ নিউয়ার কন্ট্রাক্ট। তাহলে ওল্ড কন্ট্রাক্টটা কি হয়ে যাবে? ওল্ড কন্ট্রাক্টটা রিসাইন্ড করা হবে, টার্মিনেট করা হবে। However, alteration এর ক্ষেত্রে it does not resign the original contract. It is the same original contract with a modified version that needs to be performed between the parties. Another difference is alteration এর ক্ষেত্রে there is no change of parties. Novation এর ক্ষেত্রে there are change of parties. Now, why am I giving so much emphasis on methods of termination is because you will definitely get one question from essay questions. And essay questions এ যেটা হবে যে আপনাদের essay questions এ I can ask that discuss the differences between novation and alteration, discuss the differences between fraud and misrepresentation, discuss the differences between undue influence and coercion. It can be a 5-mark question or a 10-mark question. You can make a table and discuss the following. Define করবেন and আপনারা distinguish করবেন যে দুটার মধ্যে differences কি কি। এটার জন্য I've given you the chart for your
Can you
understanding.
repeat the topics again?
Sorry?
Can you repeat the topics again? ওই যে ডিফারেন্স গুলো
যেটা
বলছেন।
যেটা বলছি হ্যাঁ so say after the essay questions you'll get questions like discuss the differences between novation and alteration, discuss the differences between undue influence and coercion, discuss the difference between fraud and misrepresentation. In that case you need to know the main differences between all of them. আমরা fraud, misrepresentation, undue influence, coercion দেখেছি। এখন আমরা novation and alteration দেখলাম। So novation and alteration এর মধ্যে similarities কি? দুইটাই method to terminate a contract by what? By mutual agreement। মানে হলো পার্টিসরা mutually agree করেছে, consent করেছে to terminate the contract. However, difference-টা কি? Novation হয় যখন there is a substitution of an old contract by a new contract. As a result, that original contract has been resigned and does not need to be performed. And also, novation can occur whenever there are change in parties or a third party is being introduced in a contract. On the other hand, for alteration, it is the change and addition, alteration in the terms of the existing contract by mutual agreement. As a result, there is no change in the parties and no third party is also involved. And due to, since there are new terms and conditions being altered in the existing contract, you cannot resign the original contract. So the original contract in a modified manner needs to be performed. Okay, so that's the main differences between novation and alteration. Now let's quickly, these are just এটা আপনারা just skip করে পড়তে পারেন, remission যা যা এখন যা যা পড়াবো just skip করে করে পড়বেন, just skim through করে করে পড়বেন. Okay, so remission is also an alteration, sorry, not alteration, it's also a method to terminate a contract by mutual agreement. What does remission mean? Remission is basically when under a contract the parties consent, mutually agree that a lesser amount or a lesser degree of performance will be accepted as a full performance of the contract. Okay, so remission মানে কি? Under the Indian Contract Act section 63 তে বলা আছে that remission means acceptance of a lesser amount or a lesser degree of performance for what was contracted for in full discharge of the contract. So say আমার আর ওসাইমের মধ্যে একটা কন্ট্রাক্ট হচ্ছে, ওকে? Osaim has taken $500 from me. So Osaim is what? The debtor. I am the creditor. Okay, so Osaim needs to pay $500 to me. Okay, he owes money. Now, Osaim, within the time period, is not being able to pay the money to me. As a result, we make an agreement. Me as a debtor, he as a creditor, makes an agreement that let's accept, ও আমাকে অফার করলো যে ma'am, I'll be giving you $300. Will that be enough to terminate this contract? আমি বললাম, okay, fine. So $300 will be my full payment and I will accept this lesser amount as a full discharge of the contract. ফুল ডিসচার্জ মানে কি, যে এই কন্ট্রাক্টটা টার্মিনেট হয়ে যাবে অ্যান্ড সে যে $200 আমাকে ও করে তার এই টাকাটা আমাকে দিতে হবে না, বিকজ তার অ্যাকসেপ্টেন্স অফ $300 উইল বি দ্য ফুল ডিসচার্জ অফ দ্য কন্ট্রাক্ট। অ্যাজ আ রেজাল্ট কি হয়ে গেল, আমার আর তার মধ্যে যে একটা লোন এগ্রিমেন্ট হয়েছিল ইনিশিয়ালি, যেখানে হি ওয়াজ সাপোজ টু পে মি $500, দ্যাট ইজ বিং ডিসচার্জড থ্রু রেমিশন। So remission happens where the parties mutually agree to accept a lesser amount, a lesser degree of performance than what was contracted for in full discharge of the contract. So parties are lesser amount accept kore will discharge terminate the entire contract. That is what we call as remission, which is a termination of mutual agreement. I mean termination by mutual agreement. Is everyone clear?
Yes,
Yes,
miss.
ma'am. Yes, miss.
No, it is a separate method to terminate a contract by mutual agreement. Why? Because remissioner ক্ষেত্রে parties are accepting less than what was contracted for. Alterationের ক্ষেত্রে you're changing the terms and conditions. So এখানে কেউ কাউকে কিছু বেশি বা কম ও করছে না, এখানে কোনো লেসার ডিগ্রি অফ পারফরমেন্স হচ্ছে না। পার্টিসরা মিউচুয়ালি এগ্রি করছে যে আমরা ফার্স্টে রেড হোয়াইট ব্ল্যাক শার্টস টি শার্টস নিব, এখন তারা এগ্রি করছে না আমরা এখন ব্লু ব্ল্যাক আর হোয়াইট টি শার্টস নিব। So they have altered the initial terms and conditions of the contract. Remissioner ক্ষেত্রে যেটা হচ্ছে is first the parties-রা 500 tones of টি-শার্টস দেওয়ার কথা ছিল, 500 টি-শার্টস দেওয়ার কথা ছিল, এখন তারা এগ্রি করছে তারা 200 টি-শার্টস accept করবে and they will discharge the entire contract. বুঝাতে পেরেছি? Okay. So remission means when you accept lesser amount or a lesser degree of performance than what initially the contract was for. Section 63 বলা হচ্ছে that if a party dispense with or remit their performance wholly or in part and extend the time for the performance and accept any other satisfaction instead of performance, it will mean that a new agreement has been formed and the existing contract has been remitted and the parties is discharged from all obligations. Say এখানে আমি একটা এক্সাম্পলও দিয়েছি, A owes B 5,000 টাকা, A pays to B and B accepts in full for 2,000 টাকা। ওকে, সো ইনিশিয়ালি তাদের মধ্যে এগ্রিমেন্ট ছিল যে এর 5,000 টাকা বি কে রিটার্ন করতে হবে। নাও বি 2,000 টাকা 2,000 টাকা accept করে বললো that this is full satisfaction for the whole debt. So I accept this amount as the full amount and discharge the parties from any further obligation, any future legal obligation. So what has happened? The old debt of 3,000 taka is discharged. We call that as termination by mutual agreement through remission. Remission is also a type of, is also a method to terminate a contract by mutual agreement. So that's all you need to know for remission. Now, এটা আমরা যেটা পড়লাম, this was for the Indian Contract Act, which we are referring to. So the Indian Contract Act and the Bangladesh Contract Act, we know that there are certain similarities. যখন আমরা termination পড়ছি, terminationের যে আমরা sections গুলো refer করছি, it's based on the Indian Contract Act. As you can see, remission is how it has been defined in section 63 in of course of our contract law as well as the Indian contract law as well. However, we call remission as a newer term in accord and satisfaction in English law. So আমরা দেখেছি duress-কে English law কিভাবে define করে, আবার coercion-কে আমরা বাংলাদেশে কিভাবে define করে। Similarly, remission-কে আমরা দেখলাম যে remission is defined in the Indian Contract Act as well as the Contract Act that we follow in Bangladesh. Accord and satisfaction is the term, which is the same term as remission, but the term that we use in the English. So let's see what does accord and satisfaction means. It is the same meaning. Accord means the promise to accept less than what was due under the original contract. Satisfaction means the actual payment or the fulfillment of the smaller obligation. So, accord and satisfaction and remission has the same definition. Since the doctrine of accord and satisfaction is applied in England, We do not follow accord and satisfaction in Bangladesh. As a result, actually, you do not need to go through this as well because there won't be any questions. This is just for your knowledge. Section 63 তে যেখানে remission define করা আছে, that clearly states that how whenever there's an agreement between the parties and if the promisee agrees to accept a lesser amount in full satisfaction of the whole claim, we call that as remission. So remission and accord and satisfaction is defined in the same manner. One is defined in the English law, one is defined in the Indian Contract Act. Okay? Both has the same definition. The difference is the term accord and satisfaction is used in the English law. The term remission, on the other hand, is being used in the Indian Contract Act 1872. Now, yeah, so that's pretty much it. Then comes rescission. Rescission কখন হয়? আমরা দেখলাম that rescission মানে কি? Rescission occurs when the parties to a contract agree to dissolve the contract entirely. So the old contract is cancelled and there is no contract between the parties. As a result, the old contract has been discharged, terminated by rescission. That is also a method to terminate a contract by mutual agreement. যখন পার্টিসরা এন্টায়ারলি কন্ট্রাক্টটা মিউচুয়াল এগ্রিমেন্টের মাধ্যমে ক্যান্সেল করে। ওয়েভার, এটাও আপনাদের অত ডিটেলসে পড়তে হবে না। ওয়েভার মার্জার জাস্ট স্কিম থ্রু করে পড়বেন নোটসটা। ওয়েভার মানে কি? ওয়েভার মানে হলো when the parties waive their rights. So I revoke. Remember the word revocation আমরা পড়েছিলাম? So I revoke, release my rights under the contract. And the other party has also mutually agreed to release their obligations as well. So আমরা দুজন একটা কন্ট্রাক্ট ফর্ম করি, তারপর আমরা চিন্তা করি যে আমরা এই কন্ট্রাক্টটা কন্টিনিউ করতে চাই না। As a result, one of the parties releases their obligations from the contract. They waive their rights. As a result, when they waive their rights, the contract is being terminated by waiver. Lastly, merger. Merger is also a method of termination by mutual agreement where due to a merge, due to where a superior right has coincide with an inferior right and come to become one person, it has vanished, merged the inferior right. Similar, a smaller company act a bigger company সাথে merge করলো, so the bigger company takes over. What will happen to the smaller company? It will be terminated. So that's what it means by merger. যেখানে merge করার কারণে the older agreement has been terminated. So the older contract has been terminated by merger. Merger is also a type of termination by mutual agreement, where the parties mutually agree that they want to terminate the contract by merger. So এখানে একটা example দিয়েছি, A may agree to work as a part-time employee to B. Later, they may decide that A will work as a full-time employee. So whether the full-time employment will take place or not, that will happen at a later date. যখন তাকে full-time employee হিসেবে রাখবে, তখন কি তাকে part-time employee হিসেবে পে করবে? না, right? So what will happen to his agreement to work as a part-time employee? That will be merged due to a new agreement where he has been employed as a full-time employer. So the old agreement to work as a part-time employee has been terminated by merger. So these are the different methods to terminate a contract by mutual agreement. Merger, waiver, accord, satisfaction, আর remission, এটা আপনারা স্কিম থ্রু করে পড়লেই পারবেন, it's okay. But termination by mutual agreement definition, of course termination by performance, আর termination by mutual agreement এর মধ্যে novation, alteration আর rescission মানে কি, এই তিনটা একটু ভালো করে পড়বেন, go through it thoroughly. Okay?
Yes,
Okay.
miss.
So now let's see situation 3, which is what happens where a contract is terminated due to a pre-contractual impossibility or a post-contractual impossibility. Okay? So এতক্ষণ আমরা দেখেছি যে পার্টিসরা মিউচুয়ালি এগ্রি করে কন্ট্রাক্টটাকে টার্মিনেট করেছে. That can be due to change of parties, that can be due to change in the terms of the contract, that can be due to alteration of the terms, that can be by remission, or that can be by rescission as well, just completely canceling all the terms and conditions. We also saw that if the parties fulfill their obligations, normally the contract will be terminated by uh, performance. That I have fulfilled, I have performed my term obligations, legal obligations under the contract. As a result, the contract will be terminated by performance. Now we will see that when a contract is being terminated due to any pre-contractual or post-contractual impossibility, যেটার কারণে কন্ট্রাক্টটা পারফর্ম করা ইম্পসিবল হয়ে যায়। কিভাবে কন্ট্রাক্টটা পারফর্ম করা ইম্পসিবল হয়? We'll see all those situations. So let's see that the third situation, third method to terminate a contract is when a termination takes place due to a subsequent or a supervening impossibility. So any pre-contractual impossibility but post-contractual impossibility কারণে যদি কন্ট্রাক্টটা টার্মিনেট হয়ে যায় তখন কি হয়? So what is pre-contractual impossibility? Pre-contractual, as you can see it in the name, a contract which at the time it was entered was impossible to perform. As a result, contract void হয়ে যায়. So say if there's a promise to ride a horse to the sun, এই টাইপের obnoxious contract যেটার কোনো perform করা impossible, if that's formed between the parties, that would mean that the contract will be terminated and the contract will be void due to a pre-contractual impossibility. So এরকম সিচুয়েশন আসে না, বাট পোস্ট কন্ট্রাক্চুয়াল ইম্পসিবিলিটি হয়। What is post-contractual impossibility? When a contract at the time in which it was entered was capable of performance. Okay? So যখন কন্ট্রাক্টটা ফর্ম করা হচ্ছিল, সে আমি আর মাশরিফ we enter into a contract and contract অনুযায়ী মাশরিফ is a singer, আমি হলো একজন কি বলে ওটাকে বাংলায়, বাড়ি, মনে করেন আমি তাকে আই এম দ্য ল্যান্ডলর্ড, ওকে? তো সো আই এম দ্য ল্যান্ডলর্ড, হি ইজ দ্য টেনেন্ট, ওকে? সো সে আমার কাছ থেকে আমার একটা মিউজিক হল আছে and he is renting that music hall from me, okay? I'm alive, he's alive, considering all the essential elements are present, that he has the capacity, I have the capacity, we both freely consent to it, and considering all the other essential elements are present, okay? Lawful consideration ache, blah blah blah, and we enter into an agreement, okay? Agreement অনুযায়ী I'm the landlord, I will be taking a monthly rent for a 1 year period, যেটার জন্য Mashif has taken the rent of the music hall and he will be paying a certain amount of money every month, okay? এখন Mashif music hallটা নিয়েছে of course to sing, of course to perform, right? Now after this contract has been entered, before his first performance, or maybe মনে করেন তার একটা কনসার্ট সে করেছে, তারপর ডিউরিং দ্যাট 1 year পিরিয়ডের মধ্যে কোনো একটা ইনসিডেন্ট অ্যারাইজ করলো, বিল্ডিং এ আগুন ধরলো, অ্যাজ এ রেজাল্ট মিউজিক হলটাও ডিস্ট্রয় হয়ে গেল। Now you tell me, is it possible for Mashif to perform there? Is it possible for me to repair it for him to do his next concert? Why? Because the object of the contract has been destroyed. However, when the contract was entered, was it capable of performance? Yes, the music hall was there and it was capable, যেখানে যে কারণে সে রেন্ট নিয়েছে যে কারণটা ফুলফিল করতে পারবে। However, due to a subsequent event, it became impossible to perform. সেটাকে আমরা বলি post contractual impossibility or supervening or subsequent impossibility. So when a contract is being entered, it is being capable of performance. However, subsequently, due to an event or a situation, it becomes impossible to perform. As a result, because of that impossibility, it becomes void and the contract is being terminated by supervening or subsequent impossibility. So in any of the situation, if it arises, the contract usually will be terminated due to supervening impossibility. Let's see situations where it may arise. First situation, as we just discussed, destruction of an object. সো যে অবজেক্টটা, যে লফুল অবজেক্টের কারণে পার্টিসরা কন্ট্রাক্টে এন্টার করে, সেই অবজেক্টটা যদি ডিস্ট্রয় হয়ে যায়, it will become impossible for the parties to perform. As a result, the contract will be terminated. As you can see, I've given an example here as well, that a music hall was rented for a series of concerts. The hall was burned down before the date of the first concert. So what will happen? The contract becomes void. The contract is being terminated due to a post-contractual impossibility. Change of law. অনেক সময় যেটা হয় যে due to a change of a law, some things becomes unlawful. So, as a result, if the performance of a contract becomes unlawful due to any subsequent change of law, that contract will be terminated by any subsequent or supervening impossibility. Okay, now say এখানে একটা এক্সাম্পল দিচ্ছি, আমি একটা এক্সাম্পল দিই যে সে আমরা লেটস ফোকাস ইন ইন্ডিয়ান ল। এখন ইন্ডিয়ান লতে it is we now know that section 377 has been appealed, it has been repealed, and এখন same sex marriages are allowed in India, right? We all know that. এখন মনে করেন সেম সেক্স ম্যারেজ হলো লিগালাইজ করা হয়েছে 2020। So say there has been a contract that has been formed between the parties, যেখানে বলা আছে যে same sex marriages are legal, it is being legal. So as a result, the parties enter into an agreement under the Special Marriage Act to marry. Okay, marriage is also a contract. Now তার পরের দিনই একটা ল আসলো, এসে বললো যে সেম সেক্স ম্যারেজেস আর প্রোহিবিটেড ইন ইন্ডিয়া। সো তার যেই মুহূর্তে পর্যন্ত when they agreed, when they promised to enter into an agreement to the contract to marry was a lawful contract. However, due to a subsequent change of law, new law অনুযায়ী একটা স্পেশাল ম্যারেজ অ্যাক্ট পাস করা হলো, যেখানে বলা হলো যে সেম সেক্স ম্যারেজেস আর প্রোহিবিটেড। সো এখন কি হয়ে যাবে? So the contract that was formed between A and B, it will become void due to a subsequent change of law. So যদি কোনো subsequent lawতে কোনো change আসে, যেটার কারণে it becomes impossible for the parties to perform the terms and conditions of the contract will be terminated due to the subsequent change of law as well, because it becomes unlawful. As a result, that contract will be terminated because it becomes void. Now comes situations 3, failure of any preconditions. So যদি কোনো contracte, when you're entering into a contract, if there is any preconditions being attached and those preconditions cannot be fulfilled, there any state of things that has changed and সেটার কারণে কন্ট্রাক্টটা পারফর্ম করা যাচ্ছে না, যে প্রিকন্ডিশনস গুলো অ্যাটাচ করা হয়েছিল সেই প্রিকন্ডিশনস গুলো ফুলফিল করা যাচ্ছে না, সেটার কারণেও কন্ট্রাক্ট ক্যান বি টার্মিনেটেড। সে I sell mangoes, okay? Now I have entered into an agreement where it stated that this agreement 500 mangoes will be delivered on June 22nd. Okay, now June 22nd এ 500 ম্যাঙ্গোস ডেলিভারির সময় আমি দেখলাম যে কোনো একটা ইনসিডেন্টের কারণে কোনো ইনসেক্টস এসে আমার সব আমগুলো পচে গেল, এখন আমি ডেলিভারি করতে পারছি না। সো হোয়াট হ্যাজ হ্যাপেন্ড হিয়ার? অবজেক্টটা কি ছিল কন্ট্রাক্টের? ম্যাঙ্গোস, রাইট? ওটা ডিস্ট্রয় হয়ে গেছে না? ডিস্ট্রয়টা কিভাবে হয়েছে? বিকজ একটা কন্ডিশনস অ্যাপ্লাই করা হয়েছিল, দেয়ার ওয়াজ আ কন্ডিশন দ্যাট আই নিড টু ডেলিভার, কন্ট্রাক্ট আগে ফর্ম করা হয়েছিল, বাট ডেলিভারিটা ওয়াজ অ্যাট আ লেটার ডেট, দ্যাট ওয়াজ দ্য কন্ডিশন। এখন যে প্রিকন্ডিশনটা ছিল to deliver 500 mangoes on 22nd June, can I fulfill that condition now? No. Why? Because it has been the whole because of the insects, because of the pesticides, all the mangoes have been destroyed. As a result, the precondition that was attached between the contracting parties have failed. So kono karone, when a contract is being entered where the basis of the contract is a continued existence of a certain state of things, and that continued state of certain things have been changed, And as a result, due to that change, due to that failure of the precondition, the contract is being terminated or being discharged. Say for example, আরেকটা example দিই এখানে, Amy and Jason, they contracted to marry each other. Okay, before the time is being fixed for the marriage, Amy goes lunatic. Now, what will happen to their contract? The contract becomes void because তাদের contract অনুযায়ী বলা ছিল, the precondition was that Amy needs to be a sane person to marry Jason. কেন এরকম কন্ট্রাক্টে বলা ছিল? রিমেম্বার, the parties must have the capacity to enter into a contract. কি বলা আছে পার্টিসের ক্যাপাসিটিতে? পার্টিস মাস্ট হ্যাভ সাউন্ড মাইন্ড। ওকে, এখন এমি কি সাউন্ড মাইন্ড আছে? নাই। তাহলে কন্ট্রাক্টটা কি হয়ে যাবে? The contract has failed due to the failure of a condition precedent. The condition was that she needs to be a sane person in order to marry Jason. Now she has become insane. As a result, that condition has failed. So due to the failure of a precondition, the contract can also be terminated by subsequent or supervening impossibility. That is situation 3. Fourth situation, death or incapacity of personal services. অনেক সময় যেটা হয়, that a contract is being entered due to people's personal qualification. So say when we see an actress, when we see a producer or a politician, যেখানে parties there, personal qualifications are the basis of a contract, right? আপনি যখন একটা সিঙ্গারকে হায়ার করেন, তাকে কি হায়ার করেন কিসের জন্য? গান গাওয়ানোর জন্য, right? So তার personal qualification are the basis of the contract. So if that person dies, can you replace, alter, or do anything about that contract? No. What will happen to that contract? That contract is discharged because a subsequent event has occurred and it has made the contract impossible to perform. So where the personal qualification of a party is the basis of the contract is discharged in cases of death or personal incapacity. So যেখানে পার্টিসরা তাদের পার্সোনাল কোয়ালিফিকেশনের জন্য কন্ট্রাক্টে এন্টার করা হয়, পার্টিসরা যদি যে কোনো কন্ট্রাক্টিং পার্টি যদি মারা যায় or তারা ইনকেপেবল হয়ে যায় ডিউ টু এনি মেন্টাল ইনক্যাপাসিটি or কোনো ফিজিক্যাল ইনক্যাপাসিটির কারণে, if they're unable to perform, the contract is usually discharged due to subsequent or supervening impossibility. Say for example, Ferguson এখানে একটা এক্সাম্পল দিয়েছি, that he has contracted to sing at a theater for 6 months. In consideration, he paid a sum in advance by Harris. Okay. Now, on several occasions, Ferguson becomes ill to sing. So, what has happened? The contract to sing on this occasion has become void because to sing was the reason, was the basis for the contract. However, he was unable, he was incapable to perform. So, যে কোনো কারণে, if death or incapacity arises of any personal services where is being involved, the contract will be discharged if the parties dies or they're physically or mentally incapable to perform. Another example would be, remember the actor died, Sushant Singh Rajput, right?
Yes,
Could you remember? So he has, of course, made a lot of he has signed a lot of movies with other directors. Even the movie that I think was released, I mean, dekhini, but that movie was also, I think, last year's Scene School was done by some other actor because he could not finish it. So that is a classic example of what happens if one of the parties' death arises, where personal qualification of a party is the reason for the contract. So tar contract অনুযায়ী, he was supposed to act in many movies. Now, before he could fulfill those contracts, he died. So what has happened to that contract? That contract has terminated due to a supervening or subsequent impossibility. What is the subsequent impossibility here? যখন সে কন্ট্রাক্টে সাইন করেছিল, he was alive. He consented that he will act in a certain movie. However, before the acting or before the what rehearsal or whatever that starts, he died. So in case of death, his contract with, say for example, কোনো একটা প্রোডাকশন কোম্পানি XYZ কোম্পানির সাথে কন্ট্রাক্টটা টার্মিনেট হয়ে গেছে। কেন টার্মিনেট হয়ে গেছে? বিকজ দ্য কন্ট্রাক্টিং পার্টি ওয়াজ ডেড। As a result, it becomes impossible for the contract to perform. So, in cases of death or cases of any personal incapacity, where the personal qualification of the parties are the basis of the contract, that contract will be discharged, it will be terminated if the parties, of course, die or if they become physically or mentally incapable to perform. Lastly, outbreak of a war. We already know this, that whenever a contract is being entered during a war with any alien enemy, that contract becomes void because it is impossible for the parties to perform that contract. They are disqualified person. So any person who at a state of war makes a contract with Bangladesh, that contract will be void because a contract that is being entered during the war with an alien enemy is being void. It is being terminated because that alien enemy is a disqualified person. And any disqualified person do not have the capacity to enter into a contract. So these are the 5 situations. If any of the situation arises, the contract will be terminated by subsequent or supervening impossibility. So what are the situations? The situation can be when the object of the contract is being destroyed, where there's any change of law, and due to that subsequent change of law, the contract becomes unlawful, when there are any preconditions is being attached, where there's a continued existence of a certain state of things and that state of things has been changed, and due to the failure of that precondition, the contract is being discharged for it, when the one of the parties, one of the contracting parties, has for their personal qualification is the basis of the contract. In short, if death or incapacity arises for the personal services of the contracting parties, the contract will be terminated as well due to a subsequent impossibility. Lastly, if a war breaks down. So, outbreak of a war would mean that a contract will be void between the parties who the Bangladesh is at a war with. So these are the situations. If any of the situation arises, you would know that a contract will be terminated by subsequent or supervening impossibility. So আপনাদের এক্সামে যদি আপনারা কোনো প্রবলেম কোয়েশ্চেন পান যেখানে ইউ সি আ সিচুয়েশন where say আমি বললাম যে A has taken a car from B. B বলেছে যে তাকে next delivery দেওয়া হবে. When A was when the car was being kept in the garage, um, there was a fire that broke down, and as a result, the car was being destroyed. Advise A and B what are their legal rights. বলেন তো এটার আনসার কি হবে? কেন? Subsequent impossibility, because এখন যে অবজেক্টটা ছিল কন্ট্রাক্টের,
Post-contractual.
হ্যাঁ পোস্ট কন্ট্রাকচুয়াল, ইয়েস ভেরি গুড, পোস্ট কন্ট্রাকচুয়াল ইম্পসিবিলিটির কারণে দ্য কন্ট্রাক্ট বিকামস void and the contract has been terminated. As a result, all the contracting parties will be discharged from their legal obligation. বিকজ যে গাড়িটা ছিল দ্য লিগাল অবজেক্ট, এখন সেই অবজেক্টটা ডিস্ট্রয় হয়ে গেছে। এখন কি কন্ট্রাক্টটা পারফর্ম করা যাবে? না। বাট যখন কন্ট্রাক্টটা সাইন করা হয়েছিল বিটুইন এ এন্ড বি, তখন কি অবজেক্টটা ছিল? হ্যাঁ, ইট ওয়াজ পসিবল অফ পারফরমেন্স, বাট একটা সাবসিকুয়েন্ট ইভেন্ট হয়েছে। সেই সাবসিকুয়েন্ট ইভেন্টটা কি? Object of the contract was destroyed. As a result, the contract becomes impossible to perform. So whenever and you see any situations where the object has been destroyed, you can say the answer should be that the termination has taken place. Sorry, the termination has taken place due to subsequent or supervening impossibility. Okay, I think Ajan diye diyeche, so I will, of course, you all have to go and pray. I will just finish in 5 minutes.
Ma'am.
Take the Yes.
কোয়েশ্চেন ছিল, এখন কি বলবো না পরে?
একটু পরে, let me finish and then attendance এ পরে then
ওকে।
okay. আর একটু shortly বলে দিই, this এতক্ষণ যেটা পড়লাম, go through them thoroughly. এখন বাকিটা breach of contract ছাড়া termination by operation of law কখন হয়? So contract terminates by operation of law যখন if the parties dies, আমরা একটু আগে দেখলাম যেখানে parties the personal skills or ability involved থাকে সেখানে if the parties dies, death terminates the contract. Just 8.4 mentioned above. So in other cases, rights and liabilities pass on to their legal representatives. But যেসব কন্ট্রাক্টে পার্সোনাল স্কিলস এন্ড এবিলিটি ইনভলভ থাকে সেখানে অফকোর্স এখন if Sushant Singh Rajput has entered into an agreement to act and now he is not there anymore, he's no more, so তার জায়গায় there cannot be another Sushant Singh Rajput, right? Because there is no more, there's one person. যেখানে মানুষের পার্সোনাল স্কিলস ইনভলভ থাকে, যেখানে পার্সোনাল এবিলিটি ইনভলভ থাকে, there's a singer who died as well. So সেই সিঙ্গার যদি এখন কোনো কন্ট্রাক্ট থাকে যে তার সে কোনো একটা মিউজিক প্রডিউস করবে, কম্পোজ করবে, ক্যান হি ডু দ্যাট নাও? নো, বিকজ হি ইজ নো মোর. So in contracts where it involves personal skills or ability of a person, death of that person will terminate the contract. That is also a situation where a contract is terminated by operation of law. Second situation is if the person becomes insolvent. The parties দের মধ্যে যে কোনো একটা পার্টি ইনসলভেন্ট হয়ে যায়, সে কারণে the contract can also be discharged. The parties are discharged from all liabilities because the contract has been terminated by operation of law. Thirdly, merger. Merge করার কারণে if a superior right has merged with an inferior right, in that case as well, the contract with the inferior right will automatically vanish. Any of this situation, if it arises, the termination will take place by operation of law. Termination by lapse of time. So any contract that has been terminated where there is a time limitation is being given and that time limitation has passed, after that time limitation has passed, the contract generally is being terminated by lapse of time. Sixth situation, termination by material alteration. So if the document containing the terms of the contract is materially altered by a party to the contract without the consent of the other parties, the contract is being discharged and it cannot be enforced. So আমরা দেখেছি alteration হয়, right? Alteration যদি mutual consent এর মাধ্যমে হয়, you can generally existing contractor existing contractor মধ্যে modified versions will be performed. Now we're talking about যেখানে পার্টিসরা materially alter করেছে and materially alter করে তারা অন্য পার্টিসদের consent নেয়নি. So there are certain terms and conditions that both the parties have agreed. One of the contracting parties, without taking consent from the other parties, have materially changed. Alteration মানে কি? Change করা. They have changed the terms and conditions of the contract. That is also a situation where the contract will be discharged. যদি কোনো of the parties, without taking any other consent from the other parties, materially alters, edits, change the terms of the terms and conditions of a contract, that contract will be discharged and that contract cannot be enforced because contractor rule কি? সব পার্টিসদের consent থাকতে হবে. আমার কনসেন্ট ছাড়া যদি কন্ট্রাক্টের টার্মস এন্ড কন্ডিশন চেঞ্জ করা হয়, সেই কন্ট্রাক্টটা ইমিডিয়েটলি ক্যান্সেল টার্মিনেট হয়ে যাবে because the terms and conditions of the contract has been materially altered without the consent of the other parties. As a result, the contract cannot be enforced. আমরা এতক্ষণ যেটা পড়লাম, we saw all the methods through which a contract can be terminated. আপনারা একটু নোট ডাউন করে নেন, 7টা মেথডের মধ্যে termination by performance, termination by mutual agreement, termination by subsequent impossibility of performance, by operation of law, by lapse of time, and by material alteration without the consent of the other parties. These are the 6 methods of terminations in generally that we discuss whenever we're discussing methods of termination. The last method of termination is when the contract is being breached, is being broken by one of the parties. As a result, since the contract has been breached, the contract is being terminated. Breach of contract itself is a big topic, যেটা আমরা of course discuss করবো, which is very important for you, but right now we don't have much time. So আমি এখানেই আজকে ক্লাসটা এন্ড করছি, টার্মিনেশন বাই ব্রিচ অফ কন্ট্রাক্ট পর্যন্ত। আমরা নেক্সট ক্লাসে টার্মিনেশন অফ ব্রিচ অফ কন্ট্রাক্ট ডিসকাস করবো। সো ব্রিচ অফ কন্ট্রাক্ট ইজ অলসো আ মেথড টু টার্মিনেট আ কন্ট্রাক্ট, যেখানে কন্ট্রাকচুয়াল পার্টিসরা যে অব্লিগেশনসগুলো থাকে, যে পারফরমেন্সটা থাকে কন্ট্রাক্টে, তারা ফুলফিল করে না, তারা ফেল করে টু পারফর্ম, or they fail to fulfill their legal obligations. As a result, the contract becomes terminated. Whenever there is a breach, whenever the contract has been breached, the aggrieved party, যে পার্টিটা সাফার করেছে because of the breach, that party is entitled to receive certain remedies. সেই রেমেডিসগুলো কি কি, দেয়ার 4 রেমেডিস, অ্যান্ড সেই রেমেডিসটা আমরা কিভাবে ক্যালকুলেট করি ওইটাও উইল ডিসকাস ইন দ্য নেক্সট ক্লাস। সো ফার উই স দ্যাট দেয়ার 7 মেথডসের মধ্যে 6 মেথডস আমরা কভার করেছি। আপনারা টার্মিনেশন বাই অপারেশন ল দেখলেন, ডেথ হলে হয়, ইনসলভেন্সি হলে হয়, মার্জার হলে হয়। এছাড়া টার্মিনেশন বাই মেটেরিয়াল অল্টারেশন হলে কি হয়, কন্ট্রাক্ট ক্যানট বি এনফোর্স। ল্যাপস অফ টাইম মানে কি, ল্যাপস অফ টাইম হলো যে একটা টাইম লিমিটেশন যখন হয়, একটা সার্টেন লিমিটেশনের পরে দ্য কন্ট্রাক্ট ইজ ইউজুয়ালি বিং টার্মিনেটেড বিকজ ইট ইজ বার্ড বাই লিমিটেশন। প্রত্যেকটা কন্ট্রাক্টের একটা লিমিটেশন পিরিয়ড থাকে, যে দিস ইজ ভ্যালিড ফর আ সার্টেন টাইম পিরিয়ড। যখন সেই টাইম পিরিয়ডটা পাস হয়ে যায়, অটোমেটিকলি দ্যাট কন্ট্রাক্ট গেটস টার্মিনেটেড, which we call as termination by lapse of time. এছাড়া টার্মিনেশন বাই সাবসিকুয়েন্ট অ্যান্ড সুপারভিনিং ইম্পসিবিলিটির মধ্যে পোস্ট কন্ট্রাকচুয়াল ইম্পসিবিলিটি যে সিচুয়েশনগুলো, ওটা আপনারা ভালো করে পড়বেন। দেয়ার 5 সিচুয়েশনস, গো থ্রু ইট থারলি। অ্যান্ড বাকি আমরা যে মিউচুয়াল এগ্রিমেন্টের জন্য যে সিচুয়েশনসগুলো পড়েছি, ইউ ডু নট নিড টু গো থ্রু মার্জার, ওয়েভার, অ্যাকর্ড অ্যান্ড স্যাটিসফ্যাকশন অ্যান্ড রেমিশন। জাস্ট স্কিম থ্রু করে পড়বেন বুঝার জন্য যে রেমিশন, অ্যাকর্ড, স্যাটিসফ্যাকশন, মার্জার, ওয়েভার মানে কি। এছাড়া বাকি অল্টারেশন, নোভেশন, রেসেশন, what is termination by mutual agreement, go through that, what is the definition, and termination by performance মানে কি, you already know that, so just go through this. Yeah, that's pretty much it. আমি এখন আপনাদের attendance নিব, and then you all can go, and then whoever have questions they can stay back, and I'll be here to answer all of your questions. Okay. Okay. Mohammed Al